The subconscious teachings of monks. A journey into the hidden wisdom of contemplative traditions. Section 1. Introduction: The Hidden Wisdom. In monasteries across the world, from the snow-dusted peaks of Tibet to the humid forests of Thailand, from the rocky cliffs of Greek Orthodox sanctuaries to the austere Benedictine abbeys of Europe, monks engage in practices that appear, on the surface, to be purely religious. They chant ancient texts, bow before altars, rise before dawn, eat in silence, and spend hours in meditation. To the casual observer, these rituals seem archaic, perhaps even pointless in our modern, efficiency-obsessed world. But beneath the surface of these explicit religious practices lies something far more profound, a sophisticated system of subconscious reprogramming that has been refined over thousands of years. These subconscious teachings are not written in sacred texts or proclaimed from pulpits. They are embedded in the very structure of monastic life itself, in the rhythm of the days, the architecture of the buildings, the texture of the robes, the cadence of communal breathing during group meditation. They work on the practitioner not through intellectual understanding but through repeated exposure, through embodied experience, through the slow and patient rewiring of deeply ingrained mental patterns. What makes these teachings subconscious is that they operate below the level of rational thought. A monk doesn't consciously think, today, through 3 hours of sitting meditation, I will rewire my amygdala's response to discomfort. Instead, day after day, the practice does its work silently, reshaping neural pathways, adjusting hormonal responses, and fundamentally altering the practitioner's relationship to their own mind and the world around them. The teachings are transmitted not through words but through lived experience, through what we might call environmental programming or embodied learning. Modern neuroscience is only now beginning to understand what monastic traditions have known empirically for millennia, that the human brain is extraordinarily plastic, that our subconscious patterns can be reshaped through specific practices, and that the environment we place ourselves in has profound effects on who we become. Research on neuroplasticity shows that our brains physically reorganize themselves based on repeated experiences and practices. Studies on meditation practitioners reveal measurable changes in brain structure, increased gray matter density in regions associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation, decreased activity in the amygdala, our fear and stress center, and enhanced connectivity between different brain regions. But the monks discovered these principles long before fMRI machines existed. Through careful observation of their own minds over decades of practice, they developed methodologies that systematically train the subconscious mind. These methodologies don't work through force or through mere belief. They work through consistency, through environmental design, through community, through embodied practice, and through time, lots and lots of time. In our contemporary world, we are obsessed with quick fixes and instant results. We want to meditate for 10 minutes and achieve enlightenment. We want to read a book about happiness and immediately transform our lives. But the monastic traditions teach us something radically different, that genuine transformation happens slowly, that the subconscious mind requires patient, consistent training, and that there are no shortcuts to wisdom. This is itself a subconscious teaching. The practice of monastic life instills patience and humility about the pace of genuine change. The purpose of this exploration is not to convert anyone to a particular religious tradition, nor to suggest that everyone should become a monk. Rather, it is to uncover the psychological and neurological principles embedded in monastic practices, to understand how these practices work on the subconscious mind, and to consider how we might apply these ancient insights to our modern lives. Whether you are religious, spiritual, or entirely secular, the subconscious teachings of monks offer profound wisdom about human psychology, about how to train the mind, and about how to live with greater peace, purpose, and presence. Throughout this journey, we will explore the hidden curriculum of monastic life. We'll examine how silence rewires our relationship to thought, how repetition creates new neural pathways, how physical practices teach lessons that words cannot convey, how community shapes individual consciousness, how renunciation paradoxically creates abundance, how a different relationship to time transforms our experience of life, how surrender can lead to true freedom, how sacred spaces affect our states of consciousness, how awareness of death brings vitality to life, and how all of these elements work together to create a comprehensive system of subconscious transformation. the monks are not just following religious rules. They are engaged in one of humanity's most sophisticated experiments in consciousness training. And their laboratory findings, tested across cultures and centuries, offer us a map to territories of human potential that most of us have never explored. This is an invitation to understand that map, to appreciate its wisdom, and perhaps to find ways to navigate similar territories in our own lives, whether within or outside of monastic walls. Section 2, The Psychology of Monastic Silence. Silence is perhaps the most fundamental and most challenging practice in monastic life. In Trappist monasteries, monks take vows of silence, speaking only when absolutely necessary. In Buddhist retreat centers, practitioners engage in extended periods of noble silence, sometimes lasting weeks or months. In Hindu ashrams, periods of mauna, or sacred silence, are prescribed as essential spiritual practice. But silence in these contexts is not merely the absence of sound. It is a powerful technology for reprogramming the subconscious mind. The average person speaks between 7,000 and 20,000 words per day. But more significantly, internal self-talk, the constant stream of commentary, judgment, planning, and rumination that fills our minds, runs almost continuously from the moment we wake until we fall asleep. Neuroscientists estimate that we have between 6,000 and 60,000 thoughts per day, and remarkably, studies suggest that up to 80% of those thoughts are negative, and 95% are repetitive. We are, in essence, trapped in a loop of unconscious mental chatter, much of it critical, anxious, or pointless. This mental noise is not neutral. It shapes our perception of reality, influences our emotional states, and determines our behavioral responses. The voice in our head tells stories about who we are, what others think of us, what might go wrong, what we should have done differently. These narratives, repeated thousands of times, become the grooves in which our consciousness runs. They become our identity, our worldview, our prison. Monastic silence attacks this problem at its root. When external speech is eliminated, the practitioner becomes acutely aware of internal speech. And paradoxically, as external speech decreases, internal speech often initially increases. This is why the first days of a silent retreat are often the most difficult. Practitioners become overwhelmed by the volume and intensity of their own mental chatter, which they had previously been able to drown out through external conversation, entertainment, and distraction. But here's where the subconscious teaching begins. By creating an environment where this mental noise cannot be escaped or distracted from, silence forces us to confront the mechanism of our own thinking. We begin to see that thoughts arise automatically, that they are not necessarily true, and that we are not our thoughts. This recognition is the first step in creating distance between awareness and mental content, what psychologists call metacognitive awareness or what contemplatives call witnessing consciousness. Research in cognitive psychology supports what monks have known for centuries. A study published in Science found that mind wandering, the tendency for our attention to drift away from the present moment into internal chatter, is prevalent in nearly half of our waking hours and is a significant predictor of unhappiness. Another study from Harvard showed that people are less happy when their minds are wandering than when they're focused on the present moment, regardless of what they're doing. The subconscious mind, left to its own devices, tends toward rumination, worry, and discontent. Monastic silence works on multiple levels to reprogram these default patterns. First, it reduces cognitive load. Without the need to process social interactions, to formulate responses, to maintain conversations, the mind has fewer demands on its attention. This creates space for deeper processing, for insights to arise, for creativity to emerge. Many monks report that their most profound realizations come during periods of silence, when the surface activity of the mind settles and deeper layers become accessible. Second, silence creates a feedback loop of awareness. In normal life, when an uncomfortable thought or emotion arises, we can immediately distract ourselves, call a friend, check our phone, turn on the television. In silence, these escape routes are closed. The uncomfortable thought or emotion must be felt, must be experienced fully. And here's the transformative discovery: when we stop running from our inner experience and simply allow it to be present, it changes. The emotion that seemed unbearable becomes bearable. the thought that seemed threatening loses its power. We discover that we are more resilient than we believed. This discovery is not intellectual, it's experiential, visceral, subconscious. The amygdala, which initially fires strongly in response to the discomfort of silence and solitude, gradually calms. The nervous system learns that not every uncomfortable internal experience requires a fight or flight response. This is a profound rewiring at the neurological level. Research on meditation practitioners shows decreased activity in the amygdala and increased activity in prefrontal regions associated with emotional regulation. The brain is literally being trained to respond differently to internal experience. Third, silence reveals the addictive nature of mental stimulation. In contemporary culture, we are addicted to novelty, to stimulation, to the constant input of information and entertainment. This addiction is subconscious. We're not aware of the compulsive reaching for the phone, the automatic opening of social media, the inability to simply sit with ourselves. Silence withdraws this stimulation and reveals the withdrawal symptoms: restlessness, anxiety, boredom, irritability. But as with any withdrawal process, if we can stay with it, the addiction loosens its grip. The nervous system recalibrates. We discover that we don't need constant stimulation to feel okay. In fact, we discover that there's a deep peace available in simplicity, in quiet, in just being. This is not something that can be taught through words. It must be experienced. And the monastic environment, with its commitment to sustained silence, creates the conditions for this experience to occur. Fourth, silence deepens listening, not just to others, but to the subtle currents of our own consciousness. When we're not constantly preparing our next statement, not constantly broadcasting our thoughts, we can actually hear what's happening in the present moment. We notice the sound of birds outside, the sensation of breathing, the arising and passing of emotions, the spaciousness of awareness itself. This quality of deep listening is a subconscious retraining of attention. Instead of attention being habitually pulled into the past and future by mental chatter, it settles into the present. Neuroscientist Judson Brewer's research on meditation and the brain has shown that experienced meditators show decreased activity in the default mode network, the brain network associated with mind-wandering and self-referential thought. This decreased activity correlates with reports of increased present-moment awareness and decreased suffering. The brain's default state can be changed. Silence is one of the primary tools for changing it. Fifth, silence creates intimacy with solitude. In a culture that pathologizes aloneness, that equates being alone with being lonely, that constantly pushes us towards social connection, often superficial and digital, the monastic embrace of solitude is countercultural and therapeutic. Monks spend hours, days, sometimes years in solitary practice. And what they discover is that solitude, when approached properly, is not loneliness. It's a profound meeting with oneself, with existence, with what some call the divine. This discovery has powerful subconscious effects. Many of our behaviors are driven by an unconscious avoidance of being alone with ourselves. We stay in unhealthy relationships, we overwork, we overschedule, we constantly seek approval and validation from others, all because at some subconscious level, we're terrified of solitude, of silence, of facing ourselves. Monastic practice systematically dismantles this fear. And in doing so, it creates genuine freedom. When you're no longer afraid to be alone, you can make choices based on what's actually healthy and meaningful rather than based on the desperate need to avoid solitude. Finally, silence teaches us something profound about the nature of communication. When monks do speak, after long periods of silence, their words carry a different quality. They tend to be more precise, more considered, more meaningful. There's less frivolous chatter, less speaking for the sake of filling space. This is because silence has trained them to feel the weight of words, to recognize that speech is a form of action that has consequences. This too is a subconscious teaching. In normal life, we're often unconscious of our speech patterns, the habitual complaining, the gossip, the automatic responses, the filling of every silence with noise. Monastic silence brings consciousness to communication. It trains the subconscious mind to pause before speaking, to consider whether speech is necessary, to feel into the impact that words will have. This training creates individuals who are more thoughtful, more authentic, and more powerful in their communication because they've learned to speak from silence rather than from compulsion. The great paradox of monastic silence is this: by learning to be comfortable with silence, we become more capable of meaningful connection. By learning to be alone, we become better at being together. By quieting the external and internal noise, we can finally hear the still, small voice of wisdom that has been speaking all along beneath the chatter. This is the subconscious teaching of silence, and it is one of the most profound transformations that monastic life offers. Section 3. Repetition and Ritual, Programming the Deep Mind. Walk into any monastery at any time of day, and you'll likely find monks engaged in some form of repetitive practice. In a Tibetan Buddhist monastery, you'll hear the deep, rhythmic chanting of sutras, the same texts recited thousands of times over a monk's lifetime. In a Christian monastery, you'll find monks gathered 7 times a day for the Liturgy of the Hours, repeating ancient prayers and psalms in a cycle that has continued unbroken for centuries. In a Zen monastery, practitioners sit in zazen, the same posture, the same practice, day after day, year after year, decade after decade. To the modern mind, trained to value novelty and variety, this repetition can seem mind-numbing, even cultish. We celebrate innovation, spontaneity, creativity. We get bored easily and constantly seek new experiences. The idea of doing the same thing every day for years, let alone for a lifetime, strikes many people as a kind of death. But the monks know something that neuroscience is only now confirming: repetition is the language of the subconscious mind. The conscious mind learns through insight, through understanding, through conceptual knowledge. But the subconscious mind learns through repetition, through pattern, through embodied experience repeated until it becomes automatic. This is how we learn to walk, to talk, to ride a bike, to play an instrument. We don't learn these skills through intellectual understanding alone. We learn them through repeated practice until the movements become encoded in procedural memory, executed automatically without conscious thought. Monastic repetition applies this same principle to the training of consciousness itself. The practices are designed to create new defaults, new automatic responses, new subconscious patterns. This happens through several mechanisms that modern psychology is only beginning to fully understand. First, there's the power of neuroplastic change through consistent practice. Every time we engage in a behavior, we strengthen the neural pathways associated with that behavior. Neuroscientists describe this with the phrase "neurons that fire together wire together." When a monk sits in meditation for the 1000th time, the neural networks associated with focused attention, equanimity, and present moment awareness are being strengthened. When a monk bows for the 10,000th time, the neural and muscular patterns associated with humility and reverence are being deeply encoded. This is not metaphorical. Studies using brain imaging technology have shown measurable differences in the brains of long-term meditation practitioners. Increased cortical thickness in regions associated with attention and sensory processing. Increased gray matter density in the hippocampus, important for learning and memory. Decreased gray matter density in the amygdala, associated with anxiety and stress. These changes don't happen overnight. They happen through sustained, repeated practice over months and years. Second, there's the psychological phenomenon of habituation and dehabituation. When we first encounter a stimulus, our nervous system responds strongly. But with repeated exposure, if the stimulus proves to be non-threatening, our response diminishes. This is habituation. The nervous system learns to ignore familiar, non-threatening stimuli to conserve energy and attention for potential threats or opportunities. Monastic repetition leverages this principle in a sophisticated way. By repeatedly sitting with discomfort, the physical pain of holding a meditation posture, the mental restlessness of a busy mind, the emotional difficulty of facing unwanted feelings, monks train their nervous systems to habituate to these experiences. What initially triggers intense reactivity gradually becomes neutral. The discomfort doesn't necessarily disappear, but the suffering around it does. The subconscious mind learns that these experiences are not emergencies requiring immediate action. This is a profound shift that affects how practitioners relate to all difficult experiences, both on and off the cushion. But here's where it gets interesting. At the same time that habituation is occurring to the surface content of experience, the specific sensation, thought, or emotion, dehabituation can occur to the underlying nature of consciousness itself. By returning again and again to the same practice, practitioners can begin to notice subtler dimensions of experience, the space in which thoughts arise, the awareness that is aware of sensations, the silence beneath sound. These dimensions are always present, but they're obscured by our habitual focus on content. Repetition, paradoxically, can reveal what's eternally fresh and new because it allows us to stop being distracted by novelty. Third, there's the power of ritual to access altered states of consciousness. Rituals work on the psyche in ways that ordinary activities do not. When a ritual is performed with full attention, when it's imbued with meaning and intention, when it's repeated in the same way each time, it creates a doorway to deeper layers of consciousness. Anthropologists and psychologists have long recognized that ritual serves as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious mind, between the individual and the collective, between the mundane and the sacred. In monastic contexts, ritual is not performed mechanically, or at least, it shouldn't be, though of course sometimes it is. Ideally, each repetition is performed with fresh attention and devotion. The Christian monk praying the same psalm for the 1000th time is not bored, he's finding new depths in familiar words. The Buddhist monk prostrating for the millionth time is not going through the motions, she's surrendering her ego anew with each bow. The ritual becomes a container within which transformation can occur. Neuroscientist Andrew Newberg's research on the neurology of religious experience has shown that during intense ritual practice or prayer, there are measurable changes in brain activity. Decreased activity in the parietal lobe, which helps orient us in space and distinguish self from other, correlating with experiences of unity and transcendence. Increased activity in the frontal lobe during focused meditation. These altered states accessed through ritual are not just interesting experiences, they have lasting effects on consciousness, on personality, on subconscious patterns. Fourth, repetition creates a sense of rhythm and order that is deeply soothing to the nervous system. In a chaotic world, the predictability of monastic ritual provides a kind of ground, a steady beat to which consciousness can attune. This is similar to how a mother's heartbeat soothes an infant, or how rhythmic rocking can calm anxiety. The nervous system responds positively to pattern, to regularity, to predictable cycles. The monastic day is structured around repeated activities at regular times: morning prayers, meditation, work periods, meals, evening prayers, sleep. This structure might seem rigid, but it actually creates freedom. When the basic rhythm of the day is established and unchanging, the mind doesn't have to constantly make decisions about what to do next. Decision fatigue is eliminated. Mental energy is conserved for deeper practice. And more importantly, this external rhythm begins to influence internal rhythms, patterns of attention, emotional regulation, even metabolic processes. Chronobiology research has shown that our bodies function optimally when they're in sync with regular cycles, circadian rhythms, ultradian rhythms, seasonal rhythms. Modern life, with its erratic schedules and constant disruption of natural rhythms, creates significant stress on our systems. Monastic life, with its deep commitment to daily, weekly, and yearly cycles of practice, brings us back into harmony with these natural rhythms. This harmony registers at a subconscious level as a sense of rightness, of being in sync with something larger than ourselves. Fifth, there's the principle of mastery through repetition. When we repeat a practice thousands of times, we move from conscious incompetence to conscious competence to unconscious competence. The practice becomes so deeply ingrained that it can be executed effortlessly, without conscious thought. This is the goal of all skill acquisition, but in monastic contexts, the skill being acquired is the capacity to be present, to be compassionate, to be equanimous, to be awake. A Zen master can sit in perfect stillness for hours not because he's forcing himself to do so, but because decades of practice have made it natural. A Christian contemplative can enter deep prayer not through effort but through the accumulated momentum of a lifetime of practice. This mastery is subconscious, it's not something they have to think about or try to do. It's become who they are. This points to perhaps the deepest subconscious teaching of repetition, That transformation is not a single event but a process. That enlightenment, if we want to use that word, is not something we achieve but something we practice, and that the small, repeated actions of our daily lives are what ultimately shape who we become. The monk prostrating for the millionth time is not doing it to reach some future goal. The practice itself is the goal. The repetition itself is the teaching. Each bow is complete in itself, and yet each bow also contributes to a lifetime of transformation. There's also a subtle teaching about surrender embedded in monastic repetition. To commit to the same practice day after day, year after year, regardless of whether it feels good or productive or meaningful, requires a profound letting go of personal preference, of the ego's demand for constant novelty and gratification. This is a kind of death. A death to the part of us that always wants something different, something more, something better. And in that death, something new can be born, the capacity to be fully present to what is, to find depth rather than breadth, to discover that infinity can be found in a grain of sand or in a single breath or in a single mantra repeated 10,000 times. The great Sufi teacher Rumi wrote, "Let yourself be silently drawn by the strange pull of what you really love. It will not lead you astray." Monastic repetition is the embodiment of this teaching. The monk is drawn again and again to the same practice not because it's always exciting or comfortable, but because at some deep level, beyond the preferences of the ego, there's a recognition that this practice is pointing towards something essential, something true. And the subconscious mind, through years of repetition, comes to know this truth not as an idea but as a lived reality. Section 4, Embodied Wisdom, the Body as Teacher. In Western culture, particularly in intellectual and spiritual circles, there has been a long-standing tendency to privilege the mind over the body, to see the body as something to be transcended, controlled, or even escaped. The Cartesian split between mind and body, the Platonic ideal of ascending from the material to the pure realm of forms, the Christian suspicion of the flesh, all of these have contributed to a devaluation of embodied experience in favor of mental and spiritual pursuits. But monastic traditions, particularly in the East but also in contemplative Christianity, have always known what neuroscience is now confirming: the body is not separate from the mind, and embodied practices are essential for deep transformation. The body is not merely a vehicle for the mind, it is an integral part of how we think, feel, and experience reality. And more importantly, the body can teach lessons that words and concepts cannot convey. Consider the simple act of bowing, which is central to many Buddhist traditions. A practitioner might perform hundreds or thousands of full prostrations as part of their practice. On the surface, this is a physical exercise. But subconsciously, something profound is happening. Each time the body bends, kneels, and lays flat on the ground, a message is being sent to the deepest layers of the psyche. I am not the center of the universe. I am not in control. I surrender. I am humble. This message cannot be effectively transmitted through intellectual understanding alone. You can read 1,000 books about humility, you can understand conceptually that ego is the source of suffering, but until the body has performed the act of surrender thousands of times, until the muscles and bones have learned what it means to bow down, the lesson remains abstract. The body has its own intelligence, its own memory, its own way of learning. And that learning goes directly to the subconscious mind, bypassing the rational filters and defenses that often block psychological change. Research in embodied cognition has revolutionized our understanding of how the body influences thought and emotion. Studies have shown that our physical posture affects our emotional state. Standing in a power pose increases confidence and testosterone levels, while slouching increases feelings of depression and cortisol levels. Our facial expressions influence our emotions. Forcing a smile actually improves mood, while frowning intensifies negative feelings. The body is not just expressing internal states, it's creating them. Monastic traditions have been leveraging these principles for millennia. The specific postures of meditation are not arbitrary, they're designed to support specific states of consciousness. The upright spine, the slightly tilted pelvis, the hands resting in the lap or on the knees, the half-closed eyes, each element of meditation posture has been refined over centuries of practice because practitioners have discovered that these physical alignments support mental and spiritual alignment. When you sit in meditation posture, you're not just positioning your body, you're positioning your consciousness. The upright spine signals alertness, the relaxed shoulders signal ease, the still body signals a still mind. Over time, through repeated practice, the body learns this configuration. The subconscious mind associates this posture with meditative states. Eventually, simply assuming the posture begins to trigger the state, a powerful example of conditioning that works in our favor rather than against us. Walking meditation is another example of embodied teaching. In Zen monasteries, practitioners engage in kinhin, slow, deliberate walking between periods of sitting meditation. Each step is taken with full awareness, coordinating breath and movement, noticing the sensation of the foot lifting, moving through space, and making contact with the ground. This practice trains the subconscious mind to find meditation not just in stillness but in movement, not just on the cushion but in the activities of daily life. The lesson is profound. Consciousness is not separate from action. We tend to think that we'll get our minds right first and then our actions will follow. But embodied practice teaches the reverse, that by training the body, by bringing consciousness into physical action, the mind naturally follows. This is why monks practice mindful eating, mindful walking, mindful working. They're training the subconscious mind to bring the same quality of awareness to all activities, not just formal meditation. The neurological basis for this is mirror neurons and the motor cortex. When we observe or perform an action, specific neural patterns activate. Through repeated practice of mindful movement, we're creating strong neural associations between physical action and conscious awareness. These associations become automatic over time. The subconscious mind learns to link movement with presence. Physical austerities, which feature in many monastic traditions, also function as embodied teachings. Fasting, maintaining uncomfortable postures for extended periods, sleeping very little, enduring extreme heat or cold, these practices might seem masochistic from the outside, but they serve a specific purpose in training the subconscious mind. They teach the practitioner that they are more resilient than they think, that discomfort is not an emergency, that the body's signals of distress are not always accurate indicators of actual danger. This is crucial training for anyone serious about psychological development. So much of our suffering comes from over-identification with the body's signals. We feel a twinge of discomfort and immediately need to adjust. We feel a pang of hunger and must eat immediately. We feel tired and cannot continue. The body, in essence, runs the show, and we're slaves to its constant demands for comfort. Monastic austerities systematically train the practitioner to observe these signals without immediately responding to them. To sit with hunger without eating. To sit with pain without moving. To sit with cold without warming. And what's discovered is remarkable. The signals often pass. The hunger becomes bearable. The pain shifts and changes. The cold is just a sensation. The body's demands lose their urgency, and a kind of freedom emerges, the freedom to choose how to respond rather than being compelled by every physical sensation. This doesn't mean ignoring the body's genuine needs or cultivating numbness. Rather, it's about developing discernment, about learning to distinguish between the body's cries of "this is slightly uncomfortable" and "this is actually dangerous." The subconscious mind, through repeated experience, learns this distinction. And once learned, the practitioner can engage with physical existence from a place of wisdom rather than reactivity. Yogic traditions take embodied practice even further, with elaborate systems of asana, postures, and pranayama, breath control, designed to influence consciousness through the body. The underlying theory is that physical and energetic patterns in the body create corresponding patterns in the mind, and vice versa. By working with the body, releasing tension, opening energetic channels, balancing opposing forces, the mind naturally comes into harmony. Whether or not we accept the metaphysical framework of yogic energy systems, the practical effectiveness of these practices is undeniable. Millions of people have discovered that regular yoga practice affects their mental and emotional states, making them calmer, more focused, more resilient. The mechanism may be partially physiological, the stimulation of the parasympathetic nervous system, the release of endorphins, the regulation of stress hormones. but it's also deeply psychological and subconscious, the body learning patterns of relaxation, openness, and balance that the conscious mind alone cannot create. The practice of manual labor in many monastic traditions is another form of embodied teaching. Benedictine monks have a saying, ora et labora, pray and work. Work is not seen as separate from spiritual practice but as an integral part of it. Monks engage in farming, cooking, cleaning, building, craft making, all performed with the same quality of attention and devotion as formal prayer. This teaches something essential about the integration of spiritual and material life. In our culture, we often create a split between spiritual time, when we meditate, pray, or engage in explicitly spiritual practices, and worldly time, when we work, socialize, handle practical matters. This split creates a subtle form of suffering, the sense that most of our lives are not spiritual, that we're only really living our values during those special moments of explicit practice. Monastic work practice dissolves this split. By bringing full presence and care to practical tasks, by working with an attitude of service and devotion, every moment becomes spiritual. The dishes being washed in the monastery kitchen are being washed with the same consciousness that is brought to meditation. The garden being tended is being tended as a form of prayer. This integration is learned through the body, through the repeated experience of bringing full attention to physical tasks, until it becomes automatic, until work and prayer are no longer two separate activities but two aspects of a single practice. There's also something profound in the teaching of physical interdependence that comes through embodied practice and community. When monks work together in silence, coordinating their movements, passing tools, assisting each other without words, a form of communion occurs that transcends verbal communication. Bodies learning to move together, to anticipate each other's needs, to function as a single organism. This is mirror neurons and collective consciousness in action, and it creates bonds that are deeper than friendship, a recognition of fundamental interconnection that is felt rather than thought. Finally, there's the simple but profound teaching of mortality that comes through sustained attention to the body. Monks, through decades of close observation of their physical experience, cannot avoid noticing that the body ages, that energy wanes, that pain increases, that death approaches. This is not morbid, it's realistic. And it's a crucial counterweight to our culture's obsessive denial of physical decline and death. By befriending the body as it is, by accepting its limitations and its inevitable deterioration, monks develop a healthy relationship with mortality. The body becomes a teacher of impermanence, of humility, of acceptance. These are not lessons learned through concepts but through lived experience, through feeling the body stiffen with age, through noticing the energy that used to be abundant becoming scarce, through accepting that this vehicle for consciousness is temporary. This acceptance, paradoxically, leads to greater vitality. When we're no longer fighting against the reality of physical existence, when we're no longer demanding that the body be other than it is, energy that was tied up in resistance becomes available for presence. We can actually inhabit the body fully, perhaps for the first time, because we're no longer trying to make it into something it's not. The subconscious teaching of embodied monastic practice is this: the body is not an obstacle to spiritual realization, it is the very ground of it. Consciousness is not separate from physical existence but arises through and as it. And the deep wisdom that the monks are cultivating is not something that exists in the head or in abstract concepts but something that is known through muscles and bones, through breath and heartbeat, through the felt sense of being a living, mortal, miraculous body in motion through space and time.